Hi, I'm Kate Bailey. I'm a coach, an author, and a sober mama. And this is Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious.
You know who made it.
Right, so welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for sober and sober curious. And today I'm delighted to be speaking to Janet Gourand. And you can probably tell by her surname that she is married to a Frenchman. She's a Brit who now lives in South Africa. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
Lovely to speak to you again. And so Janet is the founder of Tribe Sober. She's a sober woman. She founded Tribe Sober, which is a community which helps people to change their relationship with alcohol. So a really big warm welcome, Janet. Lovely to speak to you, as I said.
Thank you. Thank you.
What started all this off? What led you here?
Yeah, my story.
Exactly.
Well, because we've run nearly 100 workshops, I was thinking the other day, I've told this story about 100 times. So what I do to make it concise is I split it into 3 wake-up calls. And I had my first wake-up call at the tender age of 25. At that period in my life, I was living in London, sharing a flat with some other people about my age, all women, and we all had good jobs. I was working at the BBC at the time, and we just, all worked hard and played hard as well. And we'd always have wine in the flat, and we'd have a few glasses in the evening, but nothing drastic. But now and again, we'd have people round, and it would, turn into a bit of a party. And one night this was happening, and I was drinking as enthusiastically as ever. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in hospital, and, I felt terrible. I didn't know where I was, what was going on. And it transpired that about midnight, I announced to my flatmates that I was going to bed. And I went into the bathroom to have my bath, because that was just a habit. I'd always have a bath before I went to bed. But I locked the door and got in the bath. And then one of my flatmates came to bed like 20 minutes later, and she just knocked on the door to say good night, and there was no answer, so she started worrying a bit. She called somebody else, and they were both banging on the door, absolutely no sound. So then they did panic, and they called 999, and the fire brigade came and the medics came. They had to knock the door down. I was under the water, I was pretty much unconscious. So if it hadn't been for her, I would have drowned. So you'd think, wouldn't you, that would be a massive wake-up call. And to give credit to the hospital, they said, well, you were obviously well over the limit with alcohol last night. Would you like to talk to somebody? And I said, no, I'm absolutely fine. It's just a few glasses of wine. And it became a kind of legend, a story. And people would say, oh, did you hear about Janet and her bath? What an idiot. And never worried about it, never thought about it again. And then, life carried on. I got married at 30 to another drinker. I think I met him in a bar. And, we had that kind of marriage. I remember going to Waitrose on a Saturday, and I'd get, about 12 bottles of wine and always a bottle of Jack Daniels, because when we got home from work, shot of Jack Daniels, wine with dinner, absolutely normal. And at weekends, we'd have people round, people like us, other drinkers. And I remember we'd be at it till 3 o'clock in the morning. There'd be bottles everywhere. And, we just thought we were living the life, and we were having fun. When I look back, it were happy times. I had my son when I was 30, and I managed to stop for 9 months. But, it was hard. I was definitely white knuckling it. And I was so relieved when we could wet the baby's head with some champagne. But anyway, back to the booze. Then, of course, it was the mommy juice, wasn't it? I had to drink wine in order to parent. It was the essential parenting age. So that was my 30s. And then in my 40s, everything changed, because that's when I met my Frenchman. So I fell in love with him, got divorced. And excuse me, I've had a cold. So married the Frenchman, and his attitude towards alcohol was very different to us Brits. You know, they're a little bit more sophisticated. The French, they tend to, you know, drink more with food and for the enjoyment and for the wine, for the taste. And he couldn't quite understand why I always had to put away a bottle of wine every night, whether we were doing something, not doing something. And, you know, he started dropping hints that I should cool it a bit. And even on our honeymoon, we went to Barbados. We got married in Barbados, which was lovely. And we're having our honeymoon there. And we were at a beach bar once, you know, where you sit up at the bar. And I was drinking rum punches. And the way that he tells this story is he just turned around to say something to me. And I was lying on the sand, you know, I'd literally slid off my bar stool and I was just lying there. And he was mortified. You know, if it had been my first husband, he would have thought it was hilarious, but this one didn't. So it caused a lot of tension in the marriage. And, you know, he said, you've got to do something about your drinking. You know, it's so unhealthy. And then I looked up, I started Googling, you know, how many units was a safe limit. Safe, we know nothing's safe now, but in those days it said 14 a week. So I used to try and drink within those limits, and I had a little notebook and I'd write it all down. And I'd usually manage for about 2 weeks, and then the wheels would come off, and then I'd drink till I blacked out, and then we'd have a huge row. And it was just round and round. And every time I failed, I would feel so bad about myself. You know, my self-esteem was on the floor. So not a happy time. And then in my 50s, I had another wake-up call, which was breast cancer. And we now know the links between alcohol and breast cancer. The evidence is there. But at the time, I had no idea. This was in 2006. So, you know, I had a year of chemo and radiation, and I had a mastectomy. It was all quite serious. But, you know, thankfully, I pulled through that. But I remember saying to my oncologist, so do I have to change my kind of eating habits? And is it still okay to drink wine? I asked nervously. And he said, oh, my dear, you know, you've come through a difficult time and now you need to go away and enjoy your life. And there's nothing wrong with the odd glass of wine. So, of course, that was, to me, a carte blanche to go away and resume my bad habits. And then my final wake-up call didn't happen until the age of 63. They talk about slow learners, you know, that was me. Age of 63, I was, you know, living here in South Africa. We went away with a group of friends and rented a beautiful house for the weekend on the West Coast here. You know, it was right on the beach. And they were quite boozy friends, apart from my poor long-suffering husband. And it was the kind of weekend where you start on the bubbly at breakfast and it just carries on. And I remember waking up on the Sunday morning feeling absolutely dreadful. But, you know, the British stiff upper lip prevented me from confessing to any form of hangover. So I said at breakfast time, oh, why don't we walk to the next village? Because I've heard there's an amazing house there that we can rent next time we came this way. And everyone went a bit quiet and looked at me. And then someone piped up and said, Janet, we did that walk yesterday and you were with us and you were walking okay. You were talking okay. You didn't seem particularly drunk. And much to my kind of horror, I couldn't remember anything from that previous day, for I'd lost about 8 hours of time when I was functioning, you know, and they call that, you know, a walking, talking blackout. And it's because my brain was so soaked in alcohol that it couldn't make memories. It's not that I'd forgotten stuff, but it couldn't make memories. And when I discovered that, it really frightened me. On the Monday morning, I woke up and I said to my husband, that's it, I'm done. I'm not drinking again. And to be fair to him, he didn't say, oh, I've heard that before. But he said, you've never said that before. You've always said, I'm going to cut down. So that had finally made me realize that moderation wasn't going to work. You know, it had to be out of my life for me to stand a chance. So that's when my journey to recovery started.
Wowzers. There's quite, and I, you know, three quite, distinct kind of wake up calls, right? And it's clear as
Yeah.
day, like you said, when we're looking back at it. But at the time, it's not so clear because of the
Yeah.
normative drinking culture and people going, don't worry about it. And
Yeah. I mean, that first one, the bath,
mm,
I think back now and I kind of almost shiver because
yeah.
I've had a beautiful life. I've been very blessed in spite of the drinking. And I could have missed all that. I could have died that night. And I've got a friend in London whose 21-year-old daughter died in her bath, from a drug overdose. And it's so sad.
Yeah. It's just tragic, and it is that, isn't it? Is that the hazardous and harmful? We talk about that kind of the trajectory and the sort of spectrum of addiction, and how normalized the hazardous and harmful portion of the addictive spectrum is. It's normalized. It's just called drinking in the UK. It's not called harmful drinking or the alcohol use disorder spectrum. It's just called drinking, and it's just what you do, right? So what happened next then? So tell us about the next part where you became, your road to recovery, as you put it.
Okay. Well, here in South Africa, no idea what to do. There were no sobriety groups. So I trotted along to AA. That's what you did, wasn't it? So found all these people smoking outside. And I remember I wanted to say to them, that stuff kills you as well, but I didn't. So I went inside and, it was quite a big group, lots of guys there, kind of older guys looking quite down and out, and I just sat very quietly and listened. And they made me say I was an alcoholic, which really annoyed me because I hate that word. But anyway, they like to label you there. And then I just listened to some of the shares and they were so extreme. I'm not knocking AA, and some groups are probably wonderful. And I know they've helped millions of people. But that group, wasn't for me because I actually left thinking, well, I'm not that bad, which was it was counterproductive. And I tried a few more groups, but I couldn't find the right group. But I was determined, I was really white knuckling it. So I looked on the net and I found Club Soda in London. I think they're based in London still. Yeah. And I don't even know if they still do it. But at that time, they did one-day workshops and I was due for a trip home. So I trotted along to this workshop. And I remember it was in Carnaby Street somewhere and it was a baking hot day, which is very unusual for London. But outside there was a courtyard and it was full of pubs and people drinking, and they got louder and louder as the day went through. But we were all sitting there, half of us hungover. But it was all kind of women, and it was run by a nurse who was very nice, I think an ex-nurse. And she mainly focused on all the health issues, which frightened me to death because I had no idea until I went there. But the thing about it, more than the content, what worked for me is there were other women like me, they had nice families, good jobs, and they were drinking a bottle of wine a night and they knew it wasn't sustainable. So I felt like I'd found my people. So we all swapped numbers and we had a little WhatsApp group and we supported each other. And, I came back. And the other thing I was doing was I was blogging. I've always loved writing. So I had a blog called My World Without Wine. It's a bit sad. And I used to kind of document my journey. But I was very much relying on willpower still because I hadn't known that there was another way. And the light bulb moment for me came when I read This Naked Mind, Annie Grace's book, her piece about limiting beliefs, etc. I thought, oh, that makes so much sense, and I longed to see alcohol in a way that I didn't want it, which of course is where I am now, 8 years later. So I realized that there was another way. And when I was about 5 or 6 months sober, and about the time that I read that book, I was feeling rather depressed. I don't know if that happened to you, but Yeah, when I was about 5 or 6 months sober, I got rather depressed. And I think this happens if you've relied on alcohol for decades to make you feel good. You know, your kind of neurotransmitters get a bit screwed up, and your natural dopamine is all over the place, and it hasn't really come back to how it should be yet. So I remember feeling in quite a dark place and thinking, oh, life's so boring. And I was missing my drinking buddies. And I thought, because they'd all abandoned me, predictably, I thought, what am I going to do? Is this the rest of my life? Because, I was quite old, obviously, but I thought, there was still plenty of life left in me. So I was bored and I was depressed. And then I suddenly got I read The Naked Mind, which was definitely a light bulb moment. And then I had the idea that I would create a workshop, because my corporate career was in human resources, training and development, coaching. So I thought, I wonder if I can create a one-day workshop, a little bit like Club Sodas. But I thought I won't emphasize so much on health, we'll also emphasize on habit change and this, Annie Grace mind shift piece, because that is so powerful. So I, created a workshop completely in my comfort zone, because I created hundreds of workshops in my corporate job. So I put it on Quicket, which is like a ticket thing here, and sold 15 tickets within about an hour of posting it. And I thought, wow. So I had a hotel, here in Cape Town booked, and ran it, and it went really well. So I just started running those regularly. And obviously that helped me so much on my journey. It was probably a little bit early in my journey to do something like that, but I was very honest, with the people that I was 7-8 months sober. And that helped me so much, because not only every time I went through all this stuff, it kind of affirmed it all and helped it. There's nothing like teaching to make you learn stuff, is there? And that was great. And also the connection, because although I wasn't quite at that mind shift where you don't even want alcohol anymore, by creating a community, together we figured it out. We had some fantastic conversations. So that was an absolute game changer for me, setting up Tribe Sober, and it's been triggering my dopamine ever since.
Well, I have to say, you created a great bit of accountability there too, as well, right?
I know.
So you do. I'm out. I'm really out.
Yeah. Because I was having such fun. And the other thing that was happening is, because it's such a heavy drinking society here, I was such a novelty. I was getting approached by TV stations, radio stations, the press. I did loads of interviews. So there was no way I could start drinking again.
That's brilliant. I love that. So let's dig into this piece about you. How old were you when you stopped drinking?
63.
So you were 63. So you were retired by that point?
Yes, I retired. We actually came here on holiday at the age of 50. And I used to work at Christie's, the auction house. And we came here, and we just both fell in love with Cape Town, and we were getting a bit older, and we were a bit, fed up with the corporate stuff and all the politics and everything. We just agreed so quickly on the fact that we wanted to live here. In fact, we bought a holiday home when we were on holiday. So we did back and forth for a bit, and then we thought, well, our kids are grown up, because we're kind of second marriage, so we both had grown up kids, and there's nothing to stop us doing this. So we moved here. So I was in my early 50s then, and then I still wanted to work, so I just set up as a consultant, an HR and training consultant. And I did that for 10 years, and that brought me up to the kind of early 60s thing. So that's how that kind of stage of my life. But I was very much, drinking more and more. And I had this vision in my head that my retirement, because we've got a lovely garden here. I thought, I'm going to sit in that garden under the sun, and I'm going to drink and read my books. That's retirement.
Yeah, so let's unpick that because that's what we were talking about before, weren't we? About this retirement piece being such a big thing for people. And we were talking about, and you've mentioned it before about the mummy wine culture. There's this sort of the youth drinking where it's binging is completely normal. Then you got the mummy wine, you've got the mummy juice where it's completely normal. I'm doing big bubble quotes to try and dial down the stress and the caring load, chronic stress often for women with wine. But then we've definitely got this other piece around retirement. And I'm really interested to hear your views on what makes it hard to quit at that point, and maybe what makes it easier, if you like.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people that were heavy drinkers like me, and if they drift into retirement without a plan, I think that's a huge kind of danger period. Because it's a bit like the pandemic, how people didn't have to get up in the morning. They could be on Zoom in meetings with a glass of wine beside them if they wanted to. There's such kind of freedom in retirement, and it can be negative or positive. And it can be a void, a kind of empty feeling. And that's when, a lot of drinkers fill it with alcohol because I lived in France for a bit, and I remember, about 11 o'clock, even my husband, who's got absolutely no problem at all, it would get to 11. And if we were at home, he'd say, oh, it's time for an apéro.
Yeah.
And, my eyes would light up, whereas for him, he just meant a tiny drink, and then he'd go and do something else. But it's so easy just to slip into that pattern. And there was a lady in our community she joined because she wanted to get sober before she retired. She's very clever. She was only about 55, but she was retiring at that age. And their plan, her and her husband, was to go around the world. And as a heavy drinker, she knew that, she would waste that period because she would be drinking and hungover, and she would miss half of the trips. So very cleverly, she got sober before she left on her world trip. So I think people need a plan. And I actually think it's a brilliant time to get sober because there's so many health issues, that you just have to Google them, health problems, older people drinking, and every organ in our body it attacks. And if you are coming up to that kind of age, I would say make that a project. Just quit drinking, get that out of your life, and then you'll be able to reconnect with yourself and find a purpose that lights you up. Because it's that lack of purpose when you leave your job. Most of us loved our jobs. And when we leave, it's, oh, well, what now? Because obviously getting up in the morning, going and doing your thing, that's your purpose, and you enjoy your colleagues, etc. So there's a big void waiting there if people are drinking and they don't make plans.
I feel like, so I'm younger, but I'm going through menopause and I'm preparing for that sort of elderhood role, and doing at the moment a course with Dr. Sharon Blackie, who's a mythologist and is very much about co-creating new stories around elderhood, new positive role models, because basically we kind of haven't got any because we didn't live that long, so we didn't have that kind of huge wealth of positive, engaged role models and roles so much. So there's definitely a big piece there. Like you said, there's a kind of a void. There's when we first got sober on, you're thinking, how do I do this? Who is sober? It's like that, isn't it? Which is one of the reasons I think what you're doing is amazing, because you are one of those people, one of those women who got sober later on and just then did it, and got the meaning, got the purpose. So you've walked the walk, which is it's so important.
I think there's so much reframing to be done about aging as well. I'm 71 now, and when I look back on my life, really it got richer and more beautiful, the older I got. Just because you can't have children or you don't look, like you used to look at 30 doesn't mean your life's over, and I think there's so much work to be done to encourage young women that, they've got an amazing life ahead of them. And it's just about, again, it's the
it is, isn't it? It's the let's create a new story, let's create a shift, let's question the cultural, the normative, cultural narratives around so much, around
because
so
when
much.
I was 40, if I'd had to imagine myself at 70, I would have imagined this little lady, clutching a Zimmer frame and not leaving the house, which was madness, because 70-year-olds aren't like that anymore.
And there's that piece that you said as well, isn't there, about the lack of structure, stroke, extended holiday. You know how we have to reframe and cope with holidays, high days and holidays?
Yes.
There's that piece as well, I think, with how we view retirement. So we can tie ourselves up in not going, well, I've worked all my life, so of course I'm just going to...
I deserve it. And the way that we've been convinced, for example, that a glass of wine at the end of a busy day at work is self-care, when in fact it's the complete opposite. So if you take that forward to retirement, then your self-care is to drink all day long.
Yeah. And what do you think, with this, I've had someone say to me, well, I'm too, I've done all the damage now, I'm too old, what's the point? What would your response be to that?
I'd say that our bodies and our brains are amazing, and you just get out of their way and stop pouring poison down your neck every evening, and things will change. Healing will happen. Every morning I wake up. Well, first of all, I always thought I was one of these, what do they say, the owls that, stay up late and get up late. But these days I go to bed early and I usually wake up about 5, and I'm absolutely full of beans and I can't wait to get started on the day. And, I never imagined that being older would be like that. And when I was in my 50s, I felt tired all the time. I was working a lot and I remember feeling, tired. And I thought, well, it must be age. And I think a lot of people are in that place. They think, oh, I'm tired, but I'm 50 and I've got kids and I've got this and that to worry about. But take the alcohol away, and you get your energy back, you get your creativity back.
Getting off that kind of groundhog day feeling. Opening up obviously I think the tough bit is that you have to do that bit of early habit change, white knuckling, like it is uncomfortable. So I wonder if there's that piece, as we get very entrenched in our ways, that ability to change. Do we lose that ability to change? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the way that we frame it to people to motivate them to do it, because, it does take work. We say you don't actually have a problem. You've got an opportunity here. You've got an opportunity to completely open up and change your life. You've got an opportunity to change the trajectory of your future. And it does take 6 months of work. I think, the hundreds of people that we've helped, we kind of observe them, if that's the right word. And the average is about 6 months, of work and focus and being with a community. And then everything's different. Admittedly, you have to start learning, you have to reconfigure your life a bit, shake up your routines and learn how to navigate the, alcohol-drenched society that we all live in. But then you've got a different future ahead of you.
I do think even sort of talking to other mum friends, I'll say mummy wine friends, I haven't got any of those anymore, but just mum friends who still drink, they have noticed a shift and they talk about it differently. So I have real hope for that area. But I did pitch an article to an old editor of mine. I won't mention any names, but she is now the magazine editor of a very, very famous, I won't mention any names, magazine for the, elderhood, post-retirement. And we just wouldn't touch it. Too many wine drinkers, probably too much sponsorship from the wine industry and the cruisers.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience here. I was at some party and this lady came up to me and she said, "Oh, I know about your Tribe Sober thing. It's great. I'd love to write your story." And I said, "Well, go ahead." And she said, "I can't because my magazine, which was also a famous glossy, it's a global thing." She said 70% of our ad revenue is, cocktails and pretty wine bottles. So we're manipulated, as you well know, what we see in the press. I mean, all this red wine is good for you, plus all our confirmation bias issues. We just, oh, red wine is good for you. Hooray.
Yeah.
And it gets so many clicks, that kind of headline.
Yeah, exactly. And so tell us a little bit before we go, tell us about Tribe Sober. Tell us what you offer, how people find you. I know you mentioned you're in South Africa. Does that matter? Tell us all about it.
No, of course not. No, we have an international membership. I mean, we're quite small. We've got 400 members. And we used to think that we wanted to grow that, but it's actually so much work, looking after our members. And we love the fact that we know most of them and we're giving personal service to people. And we couldn't do that if we had 1,000 members. So, we've decided we'll stay a few hundred and then we'll know that we're really helping these people. And the way that the membership came about was I was just running workshops for a couple of years. I ran one in London. I used to run them in Joburg. I ran one in Singapore, of all places. And the people that did those workshops, well, they were very kind. They'd given me lots of nice feedback. But they'd say, we want more, we want a follow-up workshop, or we want more content, or, we need to stay connected. So I thought, and that's when I thought of a membership. So now, when people go on a workshop, they join our membership as well. And that really helps. And we've made the workshop kind of part of our membership. So the membership works by, the biggest piece is connecting them with other people, because connection is the opposite to addiction, as Johan Harris taught us all. So they join the community, but we also have a lot more. The workshop we give them lots of tools. The workshop is part of the membership. And we divide the membership into two sections, really, because I believe that it is in two parts. I think we have to quit drinking. So that's the big habit change thing. And then we have to learn to actually thrive in our sobriety, because there's so much more to recovery than just not drinking, as you well know. So we've structured our membership so that we offer people chances to try all sorts of things, within their membership subs. So they get to try coaching and hypnotherapy and art therapy and meditation. They can sample all these things, and the chances are that they'll find something they love and stick with that. We gain so much more than we've lost. And that's what people have to believe. And I think, when they see so many people in a chat room saying that, if it's just me that says it, they say, well, she would say that. But if it's all the other members chipping in, it really works.
I think it's having a plan. It's a plan, a structure, and the belief together. So it's not empty faith what you'll give, empty faith or empty hope. And the same with other those sober forums. It's like, actually, you're offering a structure, you're offering a plan, you're offering a process, and you're giving inspiration. And that is really powerful. It's not just hope peddling with empty promises. And
talk when you're drinking,
and it's what you're actually craving is some authentic, meaningful contact, connection, isn't it? We'll always finish with a reason to love sober and a tip of the day. So tip of the day first, and then your reason to love sober.
Tip of the day. Well, I guess we've already talked a lot about being connected. I would say don't try and do this alone. That's probably my biggest tip. But also one that's very popular in our community is play the movie forward. Whether you're kind of craving a drink or whatever, just play the movie forward. Don't just react if you get a craving to drink. And I always use an example of myself. The first time I did this play the movie forward, my husband was away. I was alone in the house, and I was about 4 or 5 months sober. I was just heading for my depression. And I thought, oh, I could go and buy a bottle of wine, shop down the road, bring it back, drink it, get rid of the bottle. Nobody would know. And then I played the movie forward, and I thought, what will really happen? I thought, well, the first sip will be sublime. First glass, very enjoyable. Then I'll drink it all. Then I'll go out and buy a second bottle. Then I'll fall into bed. I'll wake up at 3 a.m. feeling so shit. And then the next morning I'll feel so disappointed and depressed. But what really did it for me is I had one of those trackers, your days of sobriety. And I thought, oh, what will I do with my tracker? Will I put it back to day one, or will I just, brazen it out? And then I'll know that it'll never be an authentic tracker. So in the end, I was so exhausted, all this, I thought, oh, let's just have a cup of tea.
I love that.
So that was my example of playing the movie forward.
Yeah,
and people do it a lot. They realize, it's going to get me nowhere.
Yeah. So what's your reason to love sober today?
I think there's so many, Kate, but I think the main one is, we talk about connection, the opposite of addiction, and instantly we think about community. We need other people, but when we're drinking, we lose connection with ourselves. And I had completely lost myself really in the later days of my drinking. And that's been such a joy for me to reconnect with myself and figure out who I am. At the age of 71, you haven't got another 50 years. So you have to think, what do I really want out of this next decade? I want to be healthy. I want to be happy. I want to be useful, and I want to help other people. So that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. Thanks very much. So if you're immediately concerned about your drinking, just reach out, send up a flare. And as you can see, and just talking to Janet today, there are those communities out there. So many now. We're so lucky. So just find your fit, reach out, know that you're not alone, find your fit, and we'll see you in a few weeks for more chat.